When Richard Whitmore demoted his most successful black executive for performance issues, he never imagined that same executive would return 3 months later to buy the entire company right out from under him. Marcus Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office at TechVision Industries, his dark fingers drumming thoughtfully against the polished mahogany desk behind him. At 42, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders straight and proud despite the weight of what he knew was coming. The San Francisco skyline stretched out before him, a view he'd earned through 15 years of dedication, innovation, and perseverance, a view that would be taken from him in approximately 17 minutes. The latest quarterly report sat open on his laptop, showing numbers that any other executive vice president of product development would kill for. Under Marcus's leadership, his division had increased revenue by 47% year over year, launched 3 successful product lines, and just landed the Wellington contract, a $50 million deal that would transform TechVision's market position. But Marcus knew none of that would matter, not to Richard Whitmore. A knock at his door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. His assistant, Sarah Chin, stood in the doorway, her usually cheerful face tight with concern. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Whitmore wants to see you in the main conference room." Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate everything you've done for me." Her eyes widened slightly at his tone, but before she could respond, Marcus gathered his tablet and strode past her. As he walked through the open office space, he could feel the eyes of his team following him. They'd all seen this pattern before, though never with someone at Marcus's level. The main conference room, with its sweeping views of the Bay, had been the site of many of Marcus's triumphs over the years. He'd presented countless successful projects here, launched revolutionary products, and closed deals that had made millions for the company. Today, it would be the site of something very different. Richard Whitmore sat at the head of the conference table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his blue eyes cold as they tracked Marcus's entrance. Beside him sat Helene Morris from HR, her face carefully neutral as she arranged papers before her. The setup was exactly what Marcus had expected. "Marcus, take a seat." Whitmore gestured to a chair halfway down the table, not Marcus's usual spot near the head where he sat as executive VP. It was a small power play, one of countless others Marcus had endured over the years. "I prefer to stand, Richard," Marcus replied calmly, noting how Whitmore's jaw tightened at the small act of defiance. "Very well." Whitmore cleared his throat, sharing a glance with Helena. "We need to discuss some concerning patterns in your performance and leadership style." Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained silent. He'd seen this coming for months, ever since he'd started pushing back against Whitmore's habit of taking credit for his team's innovations. The Wellington contract had been the final straw, when Marcus had insisted on presenting it to the board himself rather than letting Whitmore claim the win. "There have been numerous complaints about your aggressive communication style," Whitmore continued, emphasis on aggressive, making the racist undertone clear. "Your tendency to dominate meetings, to push your ideas without proper consideration for established protocols." "You mean like when I prevented you from taking credit for my team's work on the Wellington contract?" Marcus interrupted, his voice level but firm. Whitmore's face flushed red. "This is exactly the kind of confrontational behavior I'm talking about. Helena has documented several instances where your approach has made others uncomfortable." Helena shifted in her seat, not meeting Marcus's eyes, as she slid a document across the table. Marcus didn't bother to look at it. He knew what it would say, carefully worded complaints, probably solicited by Whitmore himself, painting Marcus as aggressive, difficult, and not a culture fit. "Richard," Marcus said quietly, "in the past year alone, my division has increased revenue by 47%. We've launched 3 successful product lines, filed 12 patents, and just secured a $50 million contract that will transform this company's market position. Are you sure you want to do this?" Whitmore's smile was cold. "Your results aren't in question, Marcus. It's your methods, your attitude, your fit with our corporate culture, which is why, effective immediately, you're being reassigned to head our Legacy Systems division." There it was. The Legacy Systems division was where careers went to die. A small team maintaining outdated products with no budget for innovation and no path for advancement. It was the effective demotion, designed to either make Marcus quit or languish in obscurity. "I see," Marcus said, his calm demeanor clearly unsettling Whitmore, who had clearly expected either an outburst or desperate pleading. "And I assume you'll be taking over the presentation of the Wellington contract to the board next week?" As CEO, it's appropriate for me to present major strategic initiatives, Whitmore replied smoothly. Helena will help you transition your current projects by the end of the day. Your new office in Building C will be ready tomorrow morning. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. You know, Richard, my father used to tell me something when I was growing up. He said that racism wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad business. Because when you underestimate people based on the color of their skin, you blind yourself to what they're really capable of. Whitmore's face darkened. Now see here, Thompson, if you're implying… I'm not implying anything. Marcus cut him off, turning to leave. I'm just sharing some wisdom. I'll have my things moved by end of day. He paused at the door, looking back at Whitmore. Oh, and Richard, remember this moment. You're going to want to review it carefully in the near future. As Marcus walked back to his office, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his lawyer. Stock acquisition complete. 32% secured through private investors. Moving to phase 2 per your instructions. Marcus smiled. He had 3 months of legacy systems work ahead of him. Just enough time to put the final pieces in place. Let Whitmore think he'd won. The real game was just beginning. Back in his office, Marcus began packing his belongings as Sarah hovered anxiously nearby. Mr. Thompson, I don't understand. How can they do this to you after everything you've accomplished? Marcus carefully wrapped the photo of his parents that had sat on his desk for 15 years. His father, a small business owner who taught him the value of patience and strategic thinking. His mother, a civil rights attorney who'd shown him how to fight injustice with intelligence rather than anger. Sarah, he said gently, sometimes people like Richard Whitmore do us a favor. They remind us that no matter how high we climb, how well we perform, some people will never see past their own prejudices. He placed the photo in his box. But their biggest mistake is thinking that their prejudice makes them superior, that it makes them smarter, that it lets them see us coming. Sarah's eyes widened as she caught something in his tone. Mr. Thompson, what are you planning? Marcus checked his phone again. Another text, this one from his investment team. Private equity group confirmed, ready for next stage. Let's just say, Marcus replied, a slight smile playing at his lips, that Richard Whitmore is about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the wrong person. The kind of lesson that ends up being very good for my YouTube viewing numbers. As he packed the last of his belongings, Marcus could feel the weight of his father's words from so many years ago. Son, success is the best revenge, but timing is everything. Sometimes you have to let them think they've won before you show them what real power looks like. In exactly 3 months, Richard Whitmore would learn just what those words meant, and Marcus's new office in Building C would turn out to be the perfect place to prepare for what was coming. Far from Whitmore's suspicious eyes, with plenty of time to put the final pieces of his plan into place. The game was set. Now all Marcus had to do was wait for the perfect moment to show his cards. The Legacy Systems division occupied the entire 3rd floor of Building C, a brutalist concrete structure that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming glass towers of TechVision's main campus. For most executives, being relegated to this corporate wasteland would have been a death sentence. For Marcus Thompson, it was an opportunity. Another late night, Mr. Thompson. The janitor, Earl, gave a friendly wave as he pushed his cart past Marcus's new office, a space roughly 1/3 the size of his former executive suite. The clock on the wall read 9:45 p.m. Just wrapping up some projects, Earl, Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving his dual monitors. On one screen, financial projections scrolled past. On the other, a secure messaging channel blinked with updates from his team. The past 2 months had been a carefully orchestrated dance. During the day, Marcus played the role Whitmore expected, the demoted executive dutifully managing outdated systems, appearing properly chastened. But at night, everything changed. His phone buzzed. Phase 2 complete. Jang Investment Group committed. Total share acquisition now at 47%. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Richard Whitmore, so confident in his power play, had never bothered to investigate what Marcus had been building on the side. The patents he'd filed in his own name, separate from TechVision. The relationships he'd cultivated with investors who recognized his genius. The revolutionary AI technology his private company had developed while Whitmore was busy taking credit for other people's work. A knock at his door made Marcus quickly minimize his screens. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway, still coming to visit him despite her new assignment as Whitmore's executive assistant. You should see him, Marcus, Sarah said, closing the door behind her. He's practically giddy presenting your Wellington contract implementation to the board as his own vision. He actually had the nerve to say that moving you to legacy systems has improved team dynamics. Marcus leaned back in his chair studying the ceiling tiles. How's morale in the executive suite? Terrible, Sarah replied. Half the team is looking for new jobs. Jenkins from marketing quit last week after Whitmore humiliated him in front of clients, called him boy in the middle of a presentation. Marcus's jaw tightened. Richard Whitmore's racism wasn't just directed at him, it was a poison spreading through the entire company. But that was about to change. Has he scheduled the quarterly board meeting? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Next Thursday at 2 p.m., he's planning some big announcement about the company's new direction. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Marcus, what are you planning? You've been too calm about all this. Marcus stood, walking to the window that overlooked the employee parking lot. In the distance, he could see his old office, still dark since Whitmore hadn't found someone suitable to replace him. Sarah, did I ever tell you about my first job interview out of MIT? He asked. It was at a tech startup, smaller than Tech Vision. The CEO took one look at me and said they were looking for someone who would fit their culture. Code for, we don't hire black men in leadership roles. He turned back to face her. 2 years later, that same company was begging me to join after my first patent made headlines. I declined. Sarah sat down, recognition dawning in her eyes. Your AI company, the one you've been building on the side, the patents you filed independently. Marcus nodded. Sometimes, Sarah, the best way to fight racism isn't to argue or plead or demand respect. Sometimes the best way is to quietly build something so valuable that they're forced to recognize their own foolishness. His phone buzzed again. Final share purchase complete through shell companies. Total ownership now at 51%. Legal team ready. Sarah's eyes widened as she caught sight of the message. Marcus, are you? Let's just say, Marcus replied with a slight smile, that Richard Whitmore's new direction announcement might face some unexpected competition. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus's team of lawyers and financial advisors worked around the clock, ensuring every detail was perfect. Through a complex web of shell companies and private investors, they'd managed to acquire a controlling interest in Tech Vision without raising any red flags. The morning of the board meeting, Marcus dressed with particular care. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his tie a deep burgundy that projected power without aggression. As he drove to the main campus, he thought about all the times he'd swallowed his anger at Whitmore's racism, channeling it instead into methodical, patient planning. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room, the same room where Whitmore had demoted him 3 months ago. Marcus arrived early, slipping into the building through a side entrance. Sarah had arranged for him to wait in an empty office near the conference room where he could monitor the meeting's progress. Through the thin walls, he could hear board members arriving, their chatter mixing with the sound of papers shuffling and coffee being poured. At exactly 2 p.m., Richard Whitmore's voice boomed through the space. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you for coming today. I'm excited to share Tech Vision's new strategic direction, a vision that builds on our recent successes, including the landmark Wellington contract. Marcus checked his phone one last time. Everything was in place. His legal team waited in the lobby. The shareholding documents were ready. Our market research shows unprecedented opportunities, Whitmore continued, his voice smug with self-satisfaction, which is why I'm proposing a bold restructuring of our product development division. Marcus's phone lit up with a text from his lawyer. Now. Standing slowly, Marcus straightened his tie and picked up the leather portfolio containing the documents that would change everything. As he walked toward the conference room, he could hear Whitmore still speaking. And by streamlining our leadership structure, removing underperforming elements, Marcus pushed open the conference room door. 20 heads turned to stare at him, including Richard Whitmore, who stood frozen mid-gesture at the head of the table. I apologize for interrupting, Marcus said smoothly, but I believe the board should have all the facts before voting on any restructuring plans. He nodded to his legal team, who entered behind him carrying stacks of documents. Thompson, what is the meaning of this? Whitmore sputtered, his face reddening. This is a closed board meeting. Security. Actually, Richard, Marcus replied, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent room. As the majority shareholder of Tech Vision Industries, I have every right to be here. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could see the exact moment the words registered in Whitmore's brain, the way his face went from red to pale, the slight stumble as he grabbed the back of his chair for support. That's That's impossible, Whitmore whispered. You're lying. Marcus's lawyer stepped forward, distributing documents to each board member. Over the past 3 months, through a series of carefully structured purchases, Mr. Thompson's investment group has acquired 51% of TechVision's outstanding shares. All transactions have been properly registered with the SEC. Mr. Thompson now holds controlling interest in the company. The boardroom erupted in murmurs as members flipped through the documentation. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on Whitmore, watching as the man's carefully constructed world began to crumble. You're buying the company? Whitmore's voice cracked on the last word. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. No, Richard, I've already bought it. The game was over. The only question now was whether Richard Whitmore would recognize the poetic justice of the moment, or if he would need it explained to him in the most expensive lesson of his life. The boardroom crackled with tension as Marcus Thompson took his place at the head of the table, the same spot where Richard Whitmore had stood moments before. Whitmore remained frozen in place, his face a mask of disbelief and growing horror. Please, everyone, take your seats, Marcus said calmly, gesturing to the board members who had half risen in confusion. We have a lot to discuss, and I value all of your time. His eyes locked with Whitmore's. Richard, I believe there's an empty chair down there. Whitmore's face flushed dark red. This is some kind of trick, some kind of illegal manipulation. I assure you, Marcus's lawyer interjected smoothly, every transaction was completely legal and properly documented. The SEC filings are all in order. Mr. Thompson's investment group began acquiring shares through various channels 3 months ago, shortly after his reassignment to legacy systems. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Several board members shot pointed looks at Whitmore, who had finally sunk into a chair, his previous swagger completely deflated. Marcus opened his leather portfolio, extracting a stack of presentations. While I appreciate Mr. Whitmore's earlier attempt to outline a new direction for TechVision, I believe the board deserves to see the full picture of where we stand and where we could go. He pressed a button on the remote, and the wall screen lit up with financial projections. Over the past 3 months, while managing our legacy systems division, I've had ample time to analyze our company's strengths and weaknesses. What I found was troubling. Slides began to flow across the screen, charts showing declining innovation metrics, increasing employee turnover, and stagnating market share. Under the current leadership, TechVision has developed a culture of fear and discrimination that's actively hampering our growth potential. Whitmore tried to interrupt, but Marcus continued smoothly. For example, the Wellington contract, which Mr. Whitmore was about to present as his own achievement, was actually secured through innovations developed by my team, innovations that were subsequently attributed to others. Marcus clicked to the next slide, showing a series of emails and meeting notes. I've documented numerous instances where credit for successful projects was reassigned based on, he paused meaningfully. Let's call it cultural fit rather than merit. The board members leaned forward, their expressions growing more concerned as Marcus methodically laid out the pattern of discrimination and mismanagement that had taken root under Whitmore's leadership. But today isn't about dwelling on past mistakes, Marcus continued, clicking to a new presentation. It's about the future. While managing legacy systems, I've been developing something that will transform not just TechVision, but the entire industry. The screen filled with technical specifications for Marcus's AI technology, the same innovation he'd been developing through his private company. My team has created an artificial intelligence framework that makes our current products look like calculator apps. We're talking about technology that could revolutionize everything from healthcare to climate change mitigation. He turned to face the board directly. I'm prepared to transfer all patents and rights to this technology to TechVision, provided we make some necessary changes to our corporate culture and leadership structure. The implications hung heavy in the air. Several board members were already nodding, seeing the potential value that Marcus was offering. Others were shooting dark looks at Whitmore, clearly connecting the dots between his discriminatory practices and the company's recent struggles. This is outrageous! Whitmore suddenly exploded, jumping to his feet. You can't just walk in here and, actually, Richard, I can. Marcus cut him off firmly. As majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote on new executive leadership. But before we proceed, he turned back to the board. I want to share a story that I think illustrates the real cost of discrimination in corporate America. Marcus walked slowly around the table as he spoke. 3 months ago, in this very room, Mr. Whitmore demoted me because I refused to let him take credit for my team's work. He cited cultural fit issues, a common code phrase used to justify discrimination against black executives. He paused behind Whitmore's chair. What he didn't know was that I'd anticipated this move. You see, Richard, my father taught me something valuable about dealing with racism in business. He said, son, when they underestimate you because of your skin color, don't get mad, get strategic. Marcus returned to the head of the table. While you were busy taking credit for others' work and demoting talented employees based on their race, I was building something bigger. The technology I've developed is valued at roughly 3 times TechVision's current market cap. I could have launched it independently, but I chose to offer it here first, to demonstrate that true leadership isn't about taking credit or maintaining power. It's about creating value and opportunities for everyone. The room was silent as Marcus's words sank in. Even Whitmore seemed to have run out of protests. So, Marcus continued, I'm calling for a vote. Option 1, we restructure the executive team, implement comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, and integrate my new technology into TechVision's portfolio. Option 2, I maintain my controlling interest, but launch the technology independently, leaving TechVision to compete against it in the market. He looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes. Before you vote, consider this. The same mindset that led Mr. Whitmore to demote me based on race is the mindset that's been holding this company back. Today, you have a chance to change that. The vote was quick and nearly unanimous. Within 30 minutes, Richard Whitmore was removed as CEO, and Marcus was installed as interim chief executive. As security arrived to escort Whitmore from the building, Marcus approached him one last time. You know, Richard, I should thank you, Marcus said quietly. If you hadn't demoted me to legacy systems, I might never have had the time to put all this together. Whitmore's face contorted with rage and humiliation. You planned this, all of it. Marcus smiled. No, Richard. You planned this the moment you decided that the color of my skin mattered more than the quality of my work. I just refused to play the role you expected. As Whitmore was led away, Sarah appeared at Marcus's side. That was amazing, she whispered. But what happens now? Marcus looked around the boardroom, the same room where, 3 months ago, he'd stood and taken Whitmore's abuse with quiet dignity. Now, he said, we build something better. A company where talent matters more than race, where innovation isn't limited by prejudice, and where everyone has a fair chance to succeed. He picked up his phone, opening the voice memo app. And Sarah, make sure to save the security footage from today's meeting. I think my YouTube subscribers are going to really enjoy this story of corporate karma. As Marcus began sorting through the congratulatory messages flooding his phone, he couldn't help but smile at the final text from his father. Proud of you, son. Remember, success isn't just about winning. It's about changing the game for those who come after you. Looking out over the San Francisco skyline from what was now his office again, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. Richard Whitmore had taught him an expensive lesson about racism in corporate America. But the real value would come from sharing that lesson with the world, one story at a time. 6 months after Marcus Thompson's dramatic takeover of TechVision Industries, the company's transformation had become a case study in corporate culture change. The story that had started with one man's quiet resistance to racism had sparked a movement that was reshaping the tech industry's approach to diversity and leadership. Marcus sat in his office, now significantly remodeled to include a small recording studio for his increasingly popular YouTube channel, reviewing the latest company metrics on his tablet. TechVision's stock had doubled since the integration of his AI technology. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, and applications from minority candidates had increased by 300%. Your next interview is here, Sarah announced through the intercom. She'd been promoted to chief of staff, helping Marcus manage both TechVision and his growing media presence. The door opened to reveal a journalist from Forbes, notebook in hand. Mr. Thompson, thank you for making time. Your story has become quite the sensation. Marcus gestured to the sitting area, where cameras were already set up for his YouTube channel. He'd made it a policy to record all interviews, transparency being a cornerstone of his leadership philosophy. You know, the journalist began, Richard Whitmore gave an interview last week. He claimed you manipulated the situation and played the race card to steal his company. Marcus laughed, a genuine, deep sound that carried no bitterness. Did he happen to mention the dozen discrimination lawsuits that were filed against him after former employees saw my YouTube video? Or the internal emails we discovered showing his systematic suppression of minority advancement within the company? The journalist made notes. Those emails caused quite a stir when they leaked, especially the one where he referred to the executive suite as needing to maintain its traditional character. Traditional character, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. You know, that's what fascinates me about corporate racism, how it hides behind euphemisms and coded language. Cultural fit, traditional character, communication style. They're all just masks for the same old prejudice. He stood walking to a wall display showing real-time data from TechVision's new AI systems. But here's what Whitmore never understood. When you exclude people based on race, you don't just hurt them, you hurt yourself. You blind yourself to talent, to innovation, to possibility. The journalist nodded toward the displays. Your AI integration has been remarkably successful. Some are calling it the biggest technological leap since the smartphone. Because we opened it up, Marcus explained, under Whitmore, R&D was restricted to a select group that looked and thought alike. Now we have teams that reflect the real world. Different races, backgrounds, perspectives. The innovation that's emerged has been extraordinary. He picked up a tablet showing the journalist a series of charts. Diversity metrics are up 200% across all levels. Patents filed have quadrupled. But here's the number I'm most proud of. We've launched an incubator program specifically for underrepresented entrepreneurs. 30 new startups funded in 6 months. The journalist glanced at her notes. And Richard Whitmore? Marcus's expression turned thoughtful. Last I heard, he was trying to launch a competing company. Having trouble getting funding, though, seems his approach to traditional character doesn't play well with modern investors. Sarah appeared in the doorway with another tablet. Marcus, you'll want to see this. Whitmore just posted a response to your latest video. Marcus took the tablet, reading quickly before breaking into a wide smile. He's challenging me to a public debate about reverse discrimination in tech. Says I'm destroying traditional corporate values. Will you accept? The journalist asked eagerly. Marcus turned to the cameras that were still rolling. You know what? I will, but not the way he expects. Instead of a debate, I'm inviting him to participate in our incubator program's pitch day. Let him see firsthand the incredible innovations coming from the very people he worked so hard to exclude. He faced the main camera directly. Because that's the thing about karma, Richard. It doesn't just punish the negative. It transforms it into something positive. You tried to demote me because of my race. I used that time to build something bigger. You tried to silence minority voices in tech. We're now funding their dreams. You wanted to maintain your traditional character? We're creating new traditions of inclusion and innovation. The journalist was scribbling frantically. That's going to make quite a headline. Marcus nodded toward the camera. That's going to make quite a YouTube video too. But more importantly, it's going to show every kid who looks like me that they don't have to accept discrimination. They don't have to get angry. They just have to get strategic, work hard, and be ready when opportunity meets preparation. After the journalist left, Sarah lingered in the office. The video of the boardroom takeover just hit 5 million views. Comment section is wild. Marcus smiled, remembering that day. You know what the best revenge has been, Sarah? Not buying the company, not even proving Whitmore wrong. It's been showing others that it's possible, that you can face discrimination and not let it defeat you, that you can turn their prejudice into your power. He turned to his computer, opening a new document. Now let's draft that invitation to Whitmore for pitch day. Make sure to mention we'll be live streaming it. After all, he grinned at the camera that was still rolling. The internet loves a good karma story. The lesson of Marcus Thompson's story continued to ripple through corporate America, a powerful reminder that the best response to racism isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's calculated success. And as his YouTube channel Karma Stories grew, each new video showed another example of how prejudice often proves to be the prejudiced person's own worst enemy. As Marcus liked to say in his video closings, karma isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about taking what was meant to harm you and using it to build something better, something that lights the way for others. Because in the end, the best response to darkness isn't more darkness. It's building something so bright they can't ignore the light.